And welcome to episode number 5 of the Authentic Discipleship Podcast. My name is Jonathan Ciecka, and I am joined here by Mr. Adam Pitts. Adam, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Adam, tell me a little bit about you. What was it like growing up? What was a young Adam Pitts like?
A young Adam Pitts. Let's try to keep this to 2 minutes, right? So, basically, I was not raised. Okay, so let's use the context of Christianity because that's why we're here, right? And I was not raised in a Christian home. The name of Jesus was never mentioned in my house, and so I grew up agnostic, not atheist, because I had lots of spiritual experiences, as you can imagine, in a home without Jesus. But I was into all sorts of different occult practices. I studied martial arts as a kid. If I got it from this table, you would see that obviously I'm not studying them now. But when I started exploring beyond my body into the spiritual side of things, that's when things started getting interesting, and that was towards the end of my young adulthood, which we'll be talking about today, actually, in a spiritual sense. But through a series of just wild and crazy things happening and God kind of shaking up my life. When I was 25 years old, he tapped me on the shoulder and called me to him. Mm-hmm. And he had to ruin my life in order to draw me to him, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. So.
And that drawing towards him, unpack that a little bit for me. What did that look like? What started to draw you towards God?
Well, it was people witnessing to me, specifically my older brother, who had become a Christian not too long before me, but he knew it was something that I needed. Witnessed to me in very specific ways, just through, we were both avid fantasy readers, fiction readers, and so ironically, it was the somewhat questionable Christian fiction series, the Left Behind series, mm-hmm. that first spoke to me about Christ, and I started calling myself a Christian, but I didn't do anything that a Christian does, which is, reading scripture, praying, going to church. I wasn't a Christian. It was just something that I voiced. But like I said, it took God kind of ruining my life in very specific ways that maybe we can get into in another time. Mm-hmm. That really woke me up to just the fact that there really was a creator, and he was very interested in calling me to him, and then he revealed himself to me in the person of Christ through reading the scripture after he shook up my life. So.
Sidebar, because you mentioned fantasy authors. Who's your favorite fantasy author?
That would be Robert Jordan.
Cool.
Yeah.
Had to get that out there for everyone who's curious.
Yeah.
And then finally, it doesn't have to be the most influential necessarily, but just someone who was a disciple maker in your life. So you mentioned your older brother. Is there anyone else that you would identify as like, this person led me spiritually, and what did that look like?
Sure, yeah. So I'll use really like the stage of coming into young adult, since that's what we're talking about today. That didn't really happen for me until I came to the experience. About 5 years ago, I came to the Cannon County campus, and that's when I kind of woke up spiritually, kind of got out of the self-centered mm-hmm. thinking of a spiritual child, and started really seeing what God was calling me to in His kingdom purposes and serving other people and being God-centered. And so Josh Brooker was really, and don't tell him this because it'll make his head big, but he was the spiritual parent. He was the disciple maker in that stage of my life, in that stage of my spiritual walk. So what that looked like, though, for a very proud spiritual child who didn't think he needed to be discipled was him just kind of inviting me out to lunches and really taking an interest in my walk and kind of, to use the military term, flanking me, flanking my thought processes.
Unexpected spiritual development.
Yeah. And but it bore a lot of fruit. I mean, if I'm say so myself. So
Awesome. So let's start talking about spiritual young adulthood. We've hit on it a little bit already, where spiritual childhood, you're mostly focused on yourself, what you can get out of this, what's in it for you. And then you mentioned having more of a serving outlook. So you mentioned you started getting involved in serving at the Cannon County campus. What started you involved in that? Was it someone inviting you? Was it you responding to an announcement? What got you into that, and what did you first start getting involved in?
It kind of started with just the general call that comes from almost every sermon, for people to think of others before themselves, right? And for whatever reason, it just happened to click not too long after we started attending the Cannon County campus. And so me being naturally introverted and also technically minded, I got involved in production, started doing lyrics, and really enjoyed behind-the-scenes work. Didn't want the spotlight on me. So that's
And
how
yet
all
here
that
you
started.
are,
And yet
underneath
here I
the
am,
spotlight.
literally.
And going on a little bit of a tangent, talking about serving in those behind-the-scenes ministries like production, parking, hospitality to an extent. There's still a lot of really important spiritual development that goes on, even if you're not involved in like teaching straight from the Bible. Because something that Greg Swords touches on a lot is that every single thing that we do makes disciples, from changing lyrics on a screen to making the mix on the audio to pouring a cup of coffee for people. All of that contributes to people's spiritual development. So while there's not like these hierarchies of like these people are higher than these people or these people do a fundamentally different thing, it looks differently in every scenario, but the fundamentals of what we're doing is the same, whether you're serving in parking, hospitality, 5,000, or preaching from the stage. Everything is making disciples. So you started getting involved in production, and then where did it go from there?
From production, again, Josh Brooker doing a little pushing, got me involved in Authentic Discipleship. I took Authentic Discipleship after taking what was then called Foundations, which has morphed into Following Jesus. Took Authentic Discipleship and really got a taste for discipleship at that point. And I did not consider myself a spiritual parent at that point, but I knew that this was something that other people needed. And so I started facilitating that class on a yearly basis at that point. Actually, it was a twice-a-year basis. So that's where my walk took me, but it took a long time to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
It was just serving in production for the most part, just because I was an introvert. But once I took the call of God seriously to discipleship, then that's when I started stepping out in different ways.
You're saying there's hope for all of us introverts?
Yeah, I mean, we pretend eventually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We cope.
Eventually, it just kind of comes naturally to you. Right. So you mentioned that Josh is kind of the one pushing you to all these different opportunities. Was
Sure.
he also the one equipping you for those and training you in that, or was that someone else? What did that look like for you to start to develop the skills of, hey, I like just sitting back in the corner, not really having to talk to anybody or make eye contact with anybody, to now you're leading classes? Who was it that was like equipping you for that, and what did that look like?
Yeah, so it wasn't just Josh Brooker. It was also a gentleman by the name of James Adkins that really kind of took me under his wing. He was in that first Authentic Discipleship class with me, and he was heavily involved in our 5,000 ministry, and so I started expressing interest in serving in that, and he kind of helped me get outside of my comfort zone a little bit, and really too, it was just a general sense that God was calling me out of my comfort zone of being in the background. And one very bright spot in that was I took a mission trip to Haiti with James Atkins and some other people from the church, Fred Mendock, who we're both familiar with, and I had to preach in front of a congregation, and I was not prepared for that, and had never done anything like that before.
But you figured it out real quick, didn't you?
God figured it out for me.
There you go.
Yeah. But from that point on, it was like, I'm going to move you more into the spotlight, was what God was saying. So,
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned moving out of your comfort zone. That's one of the things we talk about on the team here a lot is moving people out of their comfort zones in a biblical way. So when I started getting involved in serving, it was simple stuff like maintenance around the church and that kind of thing. And then eventually I got pushed into hospitality. I don't remember exactly how that happened, but again, super introvert. I love nothing more than being by myself, reading a book, not having to deal with or look at or talk to anyone at all. But then in hospitality, all you're doing is making eye contact with people saying, hi, how are you doing? But taking little baby steps like that of, hey, I'm going to go a little bit further outside my comfort zone. Okay, now I'm comfortable with that. I'm going to go a little bit further outside of my comfort zone. And I think part of what's really essential to this spiritual growth process is constantly pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. Because once you get established in each stage, then it's really easy to stay there because it's comfortable. And we like being comfortable. But continually pushing yourself out of that. And I think that's probably one of the big leaps between specifically being a spiritual child where you're very focused on yourself, very focused on your needs and getting yourself filled up. Now you're starting to think, okay, how can I do this for other people? How can I reach them with this? How can I give them what I have been given as well? And that I would say that's probably the really critical difference between those two stages is making that transition. What would you say?
yeah, definitely. You do not grow in comfort. Nothing does in nature that I'm aware of, except maybe old men growing outward instead of upward. But as far as spiritual growth goes, you absolutely have to be uncomfortable in order to, and taking that first step, like you were saying, it can kind of build momentum. That you're going to have to constantly be uncomfortable if you're going to grow, and looking backward on your own growth, you can encourage the next generation to step outside of their comfort zone as well, because you know where they're going, and you can emphasize with their feelings and encourage them through that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So speaking a little bit specifically about how we pass that on to the next generation, not just how we do that ourselves, but when you're walking with people or identifying opportunities for people, how do you identify, hey, this might be a really good opportunity for I don't know, Fred, to get involved in 5,000 because I think that's where his passions are at. That's where his skill set's at. Hey, Nicole over here might be really good at production. Let me push her towards that a little bit. How do you sort that out, basically, in your own mind?
Well, I go like basically you just said it. What their passions are, and that's not necessarily where they're going to stay, right? So I use my own walk, my own process that I went through. Whereas I entered into something that was slightly uncomfortable, but played to my strengths, just what God has put into me thus far. And so when I am identifying opportunities for other people, I have to know that disciple, right? I have to know what their abilities are in a very natural sense as well. And then I just have to get them up to bat. I have to get them used to serving, right? And so providing that just slight discomfort, but within their comfort zone of serving, that gives them used to serving, right? And it gives me more time to observe them and maybe see how the Spirit is actually gifting them, which I think is what was done for me with Josh Brooker and James Atkins. Just kind of observing me and pushing me slightly. And so, yeah, that's how I go about beginning that is just getting people used to serving right off the bat. Yep.
And I think that's a really difficult transition sometimes for people from not serving to serving. Again, talking about going from child to young adult. And one of the most common things that I hear, at least, is, well, my schedule is just really busy. My kids have their soccer practice, t-ball practice, all these other different things. And it's difficult to convince people sometimes. Well, you do have the time for that. It's just a question of where you're putting that time. When we tell people, hey, you should be reading your Bible, and they say, well, I don't have time to do that. Okay, well, let's check screen time on your iPhone and see how much time you're spending on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and so on and so forth. We all have 24 hours available to us in the day. Now, again, with that, there's obviously seasons and special circumstances where, hey, life is crazy right now. Maybe you do need to take a step back. Maybe this isn't the right time for you right now. But I've found those are extremely limited, both in number of times and in the duration of it. So how do you walk people through that of, well, let me convince you a little bit more that maybe not that they do have the time, but that they are able to do that? What do those conversations kind of go like?
Well, first I have to convince them that we are all called to service, right? That each one of us makes up a body that has been gifted and built in a certain way that complements the rest of the body, that builds up the rest of the body. And so when they realize that, then I say, okay, so God wouldn't just give you these abilities or these giftings for you to just sit on them. So with that, He's going to provide the ability for you to put them to use. So let's look at your life and see, just like you said, where are the opportunities that you have already filled up with these other things that you feel like you need to unwind, and not that any of that is bad, unwinding or downtime or whatever, but there can be an excess of that. We have a jar of time, and we're going to have it constantly filled up with something. It's just how are we filling it? What are we filling it with? And how are we being good stewards of that? Are we filling it with a bunch of junk, or can we take some of that junk out and put in some time for God here? Because really, we should be offering Him the first fruits of our time, and that's another concept that I talk with young adults about. Is we have to, and it doesn't have to necessarily be the beginning of the day, but it should be the best of our time and our ability is given to God first, right? And point that out in Scripture to them, and so that they understand that really this time and this ability is a gift from God, and we have to honor Him with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other extreme that people can go to as well is they get so involved in serving that they're in 20 different ministries, 8 days of the week. Somehow they manage to make a 25th hour out of the day, and they're just constantly going and going and going. And I would somewhat hesitantly say that that's about as bad as not being involved in serving at all. Because if God like an Old Testament commandment that you could have been stoned for was that you had to rest on the Sabbath. That was a requirement. That was a law. And we think in our time, oh, well, no, that's fine. I can just keep going. Well, no, you can't. Or at the very least, you shouldn't. Maybe you can for a time, but that's not really going to work out in the long term. And everything that you're doing in the meantime is going to suffer because you are doing so many different things all the time that none of them are really getting done well. Have you seen that as well?
Yes. I experienced it. I experienced it as a budding young adult, spiritual young adult. I think it's an indication of the fire that you get once you realize that you should be spending your time being kingdom minded, but you get so enthusiastic that you overcommit, and then you, like you said. I keep saying like you said, but things are then at that point mediocre instead of excellent. We can either spread our time and our resources across multiple things, or we can invest them in a very few things and do them very, very well. And so helping our young adults understand the need for boundaries in that aspect is critical for their development.
And you mentioned a little bit that you went through that yourself. What were some of the signs where you started to realize, hey, I'm not doing this super well. I'm doing too much right now, or not doing the right things. What did that look like, and how did you bring yourself out of that?
Well, it looks like being tired all the time, being stressed all the time about all of your different commitments. The alarm bells started going off when I would forget commitments that I already made, and in forgetting, immediately going to the extreme in stress because I knew that I forgot because all these other things that I committed to took up all of that time. And so, what that looked like in pulling out was speaking very bluntly to my ministry leaders who were over me, and to people that I served alongside of, and just saying, I think that I need to step away from this ministry and this ministry, and that cherry picking, so to speak, of which ministries to serve in. I had to take an honest look at my own. And my own abilities and my own giftings, with the help of Josh and other mentors, ministry leader mentors, where is my time most wisely spent, right? And throwing that on top of that, being a husband and a father, and that being another alarm bell, is my family is suffering now, and they're my first ministry.
Absolutely.
Right? And not everybody that we're discipling is going to have that aspect to their life, but that is an aspect to keep in mind for those who are, heads of their families. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll take a little bit of a sidebar there. Speaking of, I think that's part of why Paul talks about genuinely the gift of singleness. And typically, when you mention that in Christian circles, it gets a little bit of a chuckle. But the gift aspect of that is that you are freed up so much more for ministry. Again, not so that you can burn yourself out and work 25 hours a day, 8 days a week, but so that you don't have these other commitments and thoughts going through your head. And on the other side of that, there are particular gifts of being a husband and of being a father or a mother or a wife that people who don't have that don't experience necessarily. So both are good and both are different. It's not that one's better or worse than the other necessarily. And you talked about one of the signs for you was speaking bluntly to other people. I think in my life, it's been a lot of frustration when I do go through those seasons of I'm just doing too much, burning the candles from both ends. I get really frustrated really easily. And I think that's what we see going back to the first episode, talking about Mary and Martha in the workbook, where Martha is running around doing a million different things for Jesus. She's the one who goes out and welcomes him. She's the one who's setting the table. She's the one who's pouring the wine. She's the one cleaning everything up. And she looks at Mary, who's just sitting there receiving from Jesus and going, what the heck? Why are you not helping me? And Mary was the one who made the correct choice, and Martha was not. That, to me, is really interesting dichotomy.
Yeah, it is a dichotomy because there are things that we should be doing for Christ, right? But Mary had the primary thing, and Mary knew that without sitting at Christ's feet, she wouldn't even know how to serve him, right? I mean, that's what I get from that story.
Yeah. That we are first and foremost to be disciples of Jesus and then to go out and make disciples. Not that one's to the exclusion of the other, but one comes first and the other naturally follows after it. So as we're coming to kind of the end of the young adult phase, we're starting to release people to do ministry on their own, where it's kind of that I do, we do, you do model of, hey, I'm going to do this. I want you to watch me do it and be trained up in how to do that. Now we're going to do this together, and I'm going to coach you progressively less and less as you start to get more experienced in it. And now you're just out on your own going to do that. What's been your experience with that kind of process of, so like when you started teaching authentic discipleship, what did the beginning, the middle, and the end of that process look like?
Well, we already talked about how it looks to identify where a disciple can best fit in, and that would be looking at the I do situation. And so that's not necessarily you doing the I do. It may be that they are gifted in a way that you are not involved in at all. It could be that you are part of the 5,000 ministry and they are gifted in production, or any type of situation like that, and they need to be connected up with another leader who can guide them in that, and so that they can see the I do from someone who is doing, right? And then do the we do, and then the you do. And so in those situations, you have to just express your confidence in them at the end of it, because they're going to have this natural hesitancy to break out on their own and do ministry, and for the next topic, it's going to be very similar for actually going out and making disciples. But let's pretend that it is a ministry opportunity that you're able to do, and it could be that you're in 5,000 and they're in 5,000, and so they're going to watch you do it. They're going to just be there, just observing. And I've done this in 5,000, and then you do the together where. Maybe you knock on the door first, and then they follow suit. 5,000 in Cannon County is a little bit different than 5,000 in Murfreesboro, but we go and knock on doors and present food. 5,000 is about food. Anyways, sidebar, sorry. And so it's a back and forth, or this time they pray for the person who answers the door. And then the next time it's just you observing, and they are doing. And so that part right there, the feedback that you give them will empower them. And if you're a mature disciple maker yourself, you're going to know that it needs to be all positive centered, so that you can empower them to move forward. But your confidence in their competence is key, because they will not feel like they are ready unless you feel they're ready.
Yeah. And we'll talk about this a little bit more on topic 12 with releasing, but there's another really interesting dichotomy there between the people who think they're ready to be released and are really eager for the opportunity, and they are absolutely unprepared for it, but in their mind they have convinced themselves that they are. And the other side of that extreme is that you have absolutely no confidence in your own competence, that you doubt all the abilities that God has given to you, and you're like, I don't think that I can do this on my own. When in reality, you're perfectly prepared to. You just don't want to get outside of your comfort zone yet. But that's a discussion for another topic, so we'll get in there later. Adam, any closing thoughts on the spiritual young adult phase, coming into it, going out of it? Words of wisdom, sage guidance from Mr. Pitts.
Sage and guidance. No, just that your disciple at this point, or maybe you're at this point, it's really commendable that they are becoming less. They are not self-centered anymore, and that they are taking active roles and active steps towards being kingdom-minded and others-focused and God-focused. And so this is a super awesome stage, full of growth. Sometimes it goes extremely fast, and sometimes it takes a while to move through to the parent stage. And so just don't feel like it needs to be rushed, whether you're in it or whether you're moving people through it. People grow at different rates at different times. And it's just awesome seeing young adults at work for the kingdom. So the key really is most of the time they're going to be that gung-ho overcommitter, and you're going to have to pull back on the reins on them, especially as they move kind of out of the first stages of young adult and they move forward in that. Creating those boundaries and helping them to not burn out is probably the biggest key while they're moving through it. And then towards the end of it, expressing your confidence in them. Yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, your confidence in their confidence. Excuse me.
I think that's a pretty good place to wrap it up. Adam, thanks for coming on the show and helping us out today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan, for having me.